Hi friends, today we are going to discuss a disorder in endocrinology, that is diabetes insipidus. In this lecture, we'll first discuss the actions of AVP, then what is diabetes insipidus, its clinical characteristics, etiology, pathophysiology, differential diagnosis, and finally how to treat the condition. Arginine vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone. Now, as the name suggests, the most important action of AVP is reducing water excretion by concentrating the urine. Now, AVP does it by increasing the hydroosmotic permeability of principal cells lining the collecting duct. So, in the absence of AVP, these cells are impermeable to water and reabsorb little of relatively large volume of dilute filtrate that enters the proximal nephron. On the other hand, when the AVP is present, these cells become selectively permeable to water and water diffuses down the concentration gradient which is produced by the renal medulla. Now, in the presence of AVP, the fluid passing through the tubules is concentrated and the rate of urine flow decreases. The maximum effect which can be produced leads to urine flow rate as low as 0.35 ml per minute and urine osmolality which is as high as 1200 milliosmoles per liter. Now all these actions of AVP are mediated through V2 receptors. The actions on the kidney are mediated through the V2 receptors. When we consider the other actions, at higher concentrations, AVP also causes vasoconstriction in the skin and gastrointestinal tract. It also leads to glycogenolysis in the liver and ACTH release by the release of corticotrophin releasing hormone. Now, these actions of AVP are not due to V2 receptors and these typically are due to V1A and V1B receptors. Now, let's discuss the action of AVP with the help of an example. So, in a typical 70 kg adult, the kidney filters about 180 liters per day of the plasma. It has a osmolality of about 290 milliosmoles per kg. Now, of this, 80% is reabsorbed isoosmotically in the proximal tubule and another 4 to 5% is reabsorbed without solutes in the descending limb of loop of Henle. So there is isoosmotic reabsorption in the proximal tubule. Therefore, the remaining amount of the filtrate has again 290 milliosmoles per liter. But in the descending limb of loop of Henle, there is mainly the reabsorption of water. So here the osmolality of the filtrate will be increased. But what happens in the ascending limb of loop of Henle is there is selective reabsorption of the solutes. Now this in turn will decrease the osmolality to 60 of the remaining fluid which is around 24 liters. Now in the absence of AVP, the urine which is issuing from the loop passes largely unmodified through the distal tubules and collecting ducts, resulting in maximum water diuresis. But if the AVP is present, the solute free water is reabsorbed osmotically through the principal cells of the collecting ducts, which results in excretion of a much smaller volume of concentrated urine. Now, this antidiuretic effect is mediated via a G protein coupled V2 receptor. Now, here is a V2 receptor which is present on the basolateral membrane of principal cells. Now, the arginine vasopressin will act on this V2 receptor, leading to cyclic AMP formation since it is a G protein coupled receptor, and this will induce the translocation of aquaporin 2 channels in the apical side of the collecting duct. With the help of these aquaporin 2 channels, there is resultant influx of water that will diffuse out of the cell through the aquaporin 3 and aquaporin 4 channels present on the basolateral side of the collecting duct. So this is how, in the presence of arginine vasopressin, only 1 liter of concentrated urine is excreted to the kidney, and most of the water is reabsorbed through the principal cells of the collecting duct. Now we will proceed to the discussion of diabetes insipidus. So firstly, a decrease of at least more than equal to 75% of secretion or action of the arginine vasopressin results in diabetes insipidus. It is characterized by production of abnormally large volumes of dilute urine since the water is not being able to absorb through the collecting duct. The 24-hour urine volume will be more than 40 ml per kg body weight, and the osmolality will be low, less than 300 milliosmoles per liter. Now, this polyuria produces symptoms of urinary frequency, enuresis, nocturia, which will lead to the disturbed sleep. The patient will not be able to sleep at the night time due to nocturia, enuresis, urinary frequency, and this will then lead to daytime somnolence and fatigue. Also, this results in slight increase in the plasma osmolarity that results in increased thirst leading to polydipsia. So the symptoms are characterized by urinary frequency, enuresis, nocturia and polydipsia. Now coming on to the etiology, it is divided into pituitary causes and non-pituitary causes. So firstly, a primary deficiency of AVP secretion usually results from either agenesis or irreversible destruction of neurohypophysis. Now it is referred to as pituitary diabetes insipidus. Some other names given to it are cranial, central, neurogenic or neurohypophyseal diabetes insipidus. Now it can be caused by a variety of congenital, genetic as well as acquired disorders. Now we will see them one by one. Firstly, out of all the acquired causes of pituitary diabetes insipidus, 50%, that is around half, are due to idiopathic, that is the cause is unknown. The other causes include head trauma including pituitary surgery, neoplasm which can be primary like craniopharyngioma, adenoma, or these can be metastatic or hematological neoplasm, granulomatous disorders like histiocytosis, sarcoidosis, infections, inflammatory conditions, chemical toxins like snake venom, and vascular disorders. These all can lead to acquired destruction of pituitary leading to pituitary diabetes insipidus. Now, when we consider the surgery, the diabetes insipidus usually appears within 24 hours of surgery. Within 24 hours. Now coming on to the congenital malformations, these include septo-optic dysplasia, midline craniofacial defects, hypogenesis, ectopia of pituitary or holoprosencephaly. These are the malformations in which there is non-formation or malformation of the pituitary gland. Among the genetic causes, there are 5 genetic forms leading to pituitary diabetes insipidus. The most common type is due to autosomal dominant, and it occurs due to mutation in AVP neurophysin 2 gene. Due to mutation in AVP neurophysin 2 gene, and this condition is not present at birth but develop gradually over several months to years. Now autosomal recessive forms are rare, and these include 3 types. So in the type A, there is inactivating mutation in AVP neurophysin gene. There is inactivating mutation. In type B, there is deletion in AVP neurophysin gene. And in type C, the gene which is involved is WFS1 gene. Now this syndrome is known as Wolfram syndrome. It is characterized by DID mode. So this stands for DI stands for presence of diabetes insipidus, DM stands for presence of diabetes mellitus. O is for optic atrophy, and D stands for neural deafness. So this is known as Wolfram syndrome, and very rarely it can be due to X-linked recessive form as well. So this was all about the pituitary causes. Now we are coming on to the non-pituitary causes. These causes include three types, that is gestational diabetes insipidus, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, and primary polydipsia. So gestational diabetes insipidus occurs due to increased metabolism of AVP due to presence of N-terminal aminopeptidase. Now what happens is this enzyme will increase the degradation of AVP, and this is produced by the placenta. This condition is usually seen in second and third trimesters. Now nephrogenic diabetes insipidus is characterized by presence of AVP, but it is unable to act on the target site. Now this can again be of two types, that is acquired or due to genetic disorders. Now the acquired conditions include most importantly drugs like lithium demeclocycline, antibiotics like amphotericin B, aminoglycosides, etc. Then metabolic conditions like hypercalcemia, obstruction of ureter or urethra, vascular conditions, granulomatous diseases involving the kidney, neoplasm like sarcoma of kidney, amyloidosis, or it can be idiopathic. Now coming on to the genetic conditions, the most common type is X-linked recessive, which occurs due to mutations in V2 receptor gene. Also, it can be due to autosomal recessive or autosomal dominant forms. Now, when we discuss the primary polydipsia, in this condition, what happens is due to excessive water intake, there is inhibition of release of AVP. The patient is taking excessive water, therefore it is inhibiting the release of AVP. Now primary polydipsia is of three types. It can be either psychogenic, dipsogenic, or iatrogenic. Now the psychogenic form is not associated with thirst, and the polydipsia seems to be a feature of psychosis associated with schizophrenia or obsessive compulsive disorder. Now the dipsogenic form, as the name suggests, is associated with abnormal increased thirst, which is caused by reduction in the set point of osmoregulatory mechanism. Now it is seen with the conditions like granulomas due to sarcoidosis, infectious meningitis, head trauma, demyelination disorders like multiple sclerosis, and drugs. Finally, the iatrogenic form is due to recommendations to increase the fluid intake for its presumed health benefits. So, we have completed with the etiology. We have discussed the pituitary and non-pituitary causes. The non-pituitary include gestational diabetes insipidus, nephrogenic, and primary polydipsia. Now, when we consider the pathophysiology, it is similar for pituitary, gestational, or nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Now, what happens is due to polyuria, there is small decrease in the body water, about 1 to 2% decrease in the body water, along with proportional increase in the plasma osmolarity and sodium. Now, this in turn leads to increased thirst and increased water intake. Now, this polyuria in this setting is occurring due to the defect in AVP. Either the AVP is not produced in pituitary causes, or it is not able to act in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, or it is being destructed by the aminopeptidase produced by the placenta. Now, in all these conditions, hypernatremia or the signs of dehydration do not develop unless the patient also has a defect in thirst or fails to increase fluid intake for any other reason. So basically, this increased water intake will balance the condition and there will be no signs of hypernatremia or dehydration. On the other hand, in primary polydipsia, the pathogenesis is just reverse of that we discussed in pituitary gestational of or nephrogenic causes. What happens in this is due to any cause of increased water intake, it is leading to polyuria. So polyuria is the result of increased water intake and not the initial manifestation. Along with this, there will be proportional decrease in plasma osmolality, sodium, AVP secretion and urinary concentration. Now coming on to the diagnosis and how to differentiate between the conditions which are leading to diabetes insipidus. Firstly, whenever the symptoms of urinary frequency, nocturia, enuresis are present in the absence of glycosuria, the possibility of diabetes insipidus should be evaluated by collecting 24-hour urinary volume and osmolarity on unrestricted fluid intake. Means patient is not restricted in the taking fluid. So if the volume is less than 40 ml per kg and the osmolarity is more than 300 milliosmol per kg, it rules out diabetes insipidus and the causes like BPH and other obstructive causes of genitourinary system should be evaluated. Now, if the volume is more than 40 ml per kg and osmolarity is less than 300, which makes the diagnosis of diabetes insipidus, we will then measure basal plasma AVP levels. Now, if the levels are more than 1 picogram per ml, then this makes the diagnosis of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. This means the AVP is present but is not able to act on the target site. So further we will evaluate to identify the cause of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. But if the AVP levels are less than 1 picogram per ml, then it is either a pituitary or primary polydipsia. Then we can go for brain imaging in the form of MRI. Now brain imaging will help us in two ways. Firstly, we will look for pituitary bright spot, whether it is present or not. If it is present, then neurohypophysis is functional and there is transient decrease in the release of AVP. So this will be the case of primary polydipsia. On the other hand, if the pituitary bright spot is absent or abnormally small, this means the pituitary is not able to secrete and store the ADH, which makes the diagnosis of pituitary diabetes insipidus. Secondly, it also helps us in identifying the pathology which is underlying the central or primary polydipsia. Now, we also sometimes use water deprivation test in which patient is deprived of water and we see whether there is increase in plasma osmolality. If there is increase in plasma osmolality, there will be likely diagnosis of primary polydipsia. And then we give the patient desmopressin to differentiate between central and nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Now this test is usually not preferred now because it do not differentiate between primary polydipsia and partial nephrogenic diabetes insipidus and partial central diabetes insipidus. So this is the current test which is followed. Now after we have made the diagnosis of pituitary diabetes insipidus or nephrogenic form or primary polydipsia, now we will discuss the treatment of these individual conditions. Firstly, the signs and symptoms of uncomplicated pituitary diabetes insipidus can be eliminated by treatment with desmopressin, which is also known as DDAVP. Now it is a synthetic analog of AVP which acts selectively on V2 receptors. It is resistant to degradation, therefore 3 to 4 times longer duration of action is there. It can be given by intravenous, subcutaneous, nasal spray as well as in the form of oral tablets. It produces slight, that is 1 to 3% increase in total body water and also decreases the plasma osmolarity and sodium. Now hyponatremia will very rarely develop. When we consider the treatment of primary polydipsia, these patients cannot be safely treated with desmopressin or other antidiuretic because it do not eliminate the urge to drink. The patient will be drinking excessive water, and we give along with this desmopressin. This can precipitate severe hyponatremia. Now this primary polydipsia, as we discussed, is of three types: dipsogenic, psychogenic and iatrogenic. Now there is no effective way to treat the dipsogenic or psychogenic forms, but iatrogenic form may respond to patient education. If the patient is taking increased amounts of water for health benefits, we can educate the patient to decrease the water intake. Finally, the last part of the lecture, that is treatment of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Firstly, it will have no response to standard dose of desmopressin. The partial resistance can be overcome by 10-fold higher doses, but this treatment is too expensive as well as inconvenient for long-term use. So this is not used. So what is currently used for the treatment of nephrogenic diabetes insipidus? Thiazide diuretics with or without amiloride, low sodium diet and prostaglandin inhibitor indomethacin usually relieves polyuria and polydipsia in about 30 to 70% of the patients and may eliminate them completely in some patients. Also, the use of amiloride decreases the risk of hypokalemia and gastric irritation due to thiazide diuretics. So this was all about the lecture. I have covered most of the points. Thank you so much.